Why was she always the quiet one at the edge of the room? The laughter carried easily in the chow hall that night, loud, careless, the sound of men who believed tomorrow would unfold exactly as today had. Metal trays clattered, boots scraped concrete floors, jokes were thrown like grenades that exploded into bursts of laughter. Marines filled their stomachs and their lungs before another patrol, as though ritual could shield them from the weight of Hellman's dust and fire. But Elena Marquez sat alone, cross-legged on a tarp at the far edge of the training yard, her rifle stretched across her lap like an anchor. Her small frame, barely 5 feet and change, looked almost swallowed by the desert tan of her blouse. To anyone passing, she was invisible. To her, invisibility was survival. She polished the bolt, drew the cloth through the barrel, then paused to scribble something in the small green notebook resting against her knee. Every motion was deliberate, precise, almost reverent. Her rifle wasn't a weapon, it was scripture. Each click on the scope was a verse. Each calculation of wind a prayer. 2 lance corporals strolled by, tossing insults loud enough for her to hear. There's the quota sniper. Paper shooter, good thing cardboard doesn't shoot back. Their smirks lingered a moment, sharp as a shove. They didn't slow, didn't wait for her to answer. They never expected her to. She didn't. She kept her head low, pen scratching another figure into the notebook. She had heard every name before: dead weight mascot box-check sniper, too small, too quiet, too different, and the senior sergeant, scarred from 3 deployments, had dismissed her with equal ease. Marquez is fine for range scores, one had told the company commander. But combat, keep her on radios, keep her useful. And so they did. Support detail became her lane, carrying gear, running comms, updating logistics spreadsheets. She wasn't asked to climb ridges. She wasn't asked to take glass and scope into the field. She was told, politely, to stay invisible. But what none of them noticed, or cared to notice, was the ritual of her nights. While others smoked and traded jokes under the hard Afghan stars, Elena spread maps across her bunk under the glow of a red-lensed flashlight. She studied the folds of terrain until she could walk them in her mind. She logged wind patterns at different hours of the day, different valleys, different slopes. She dry-fired her rifle until the rhythm of her breathing was mechanical. And in her notebook, page after page filled with her neat handwriting, she built a private doctrine of survival. Ballistic tables, calculations by hand, margin notes in the language of patience. That notebook looked ordinary. To anyone else it could have been a grocery list. But in its pages, Elena was writing the story no one else believed she was capable of telling. On her left forearm, usually hidden beneath the sleeve of her blouse, was a small tattoo, the Marine sniper emblem, a scoped rifle flanked by laurel. She had earned it through sweat and precision, through nights of failure and mornings of unrelenting drills at sniper school. But here in Helmand, she tugged her sleeve low. She knew better than to remind anyone. That was the paradox of Elena Marquez. She didn't fight back when mocked. She didn't shout when dismissed. She carried their doubt the same way she carried her rifle, quietly, carefully, with patience. Because she knew one day, silence would end. Her story hadn't begun here in the dust and heat of Helmand. It had begun far away, under the wide skis of South Texas, where the air smelled of mesquite and dust, where horizons stretched flat and endless. Her father, a Marine whose injuries had forced him home too soon, had raised her with the discipline of the Corps, even though the nearest barracks were hundreds of miles away. Chores at dawn, fences repaired before breakfast, and in the evening when the sky bruised purple, he lined up soda cans on fence posts and handed her his battered hunting rifle. "Steady breath," he'd whisper, "slow trigger, let the shot surprise you." By 12, she could drop every can at 50 yards without blinking. By 16, she could outshoot the men who came to hunt on their land. Her father rarely smiled, but when he watched her pull the trigger, his eyes shone with pride. Then suddenly he was gone, a heart attack, silent, unannounced. She was 17 and the world cracked beneath her. She joined the Marines not just to honor him, but to test herself against the standard he had etched into her bones. She earned a sniper slot, something few women had ever done. But in Helmand, paper qualifications mattered less than perception, and perception said she was a liability. So she kept her silence, carried her rifle to the range, her notebooks to her bunk, let them mock, let them dismiss. Patience, she told herself, patience has its hour. The compound itself lived in cycles, patrols out, reports in, briefings clipped and repetitive, Marines moving in their orbits. Elena floated at the edges, seen but not valued. Then came the orders. 480 Marines, reinforced by attachments, moving into a valley intel claimed was lightly held. A sweep-end hold. Routine, they called it. Secure, clear, stabilize. Maps projected ridgelines and routes. Doctrine painted the picture as straightforward. But when Elena sat at the back of the briefing room, notebook balanced on her thigh, she saw something else. The contour lines screamed trap, narrow approaches, high ground on three sides, kill zones waiting to be lit. She raised her hand, steady as her trigger finger. "Sir, the valley, have we considered the risk? It's a deliberate trap. These folds could mask a significant enemy presence. It fits too cleanly." The colonel glanced at her only long enough to dismiss her. "Sergeant, track equipment, not strategy, above your pay grade." Chuckles rippled through the room. "Dead weight talking tactics now," someone whispered. Elena closed her notebook without a word. The Marines filed out, joking about how quick the mission would be. Confident, armored, unshaken. She watched them climb into transports and roll toward the valley's mouth. 480 Marines carrying doctrine into a bowl they thought they owned. She remained behind. Orders were clear. Support detail, monitor comms, track supplies, stay out of operational lanes. But as dust from the convoy blurred the horizon, Elena felt the weight of every number she had ever written in her notebooks, every margin note traced in the silence of long nights. She had already walked that valley in her mind. She knew how it would close. And now, with 480 Marines rolling into its jaws, she was left behind. At the range the next morning, her bullets rang steel in rhythm, breath in, breath out. A young private muttered behind her, "Luck." A gunnery sergeant spat dust. "Clay pigeons don't shoot back. Paper doesn't scream." She logged her shots, stripped the rifle, and kept silent. At chow, Marines stood up when she sat down, scraping chairs away as if her presence contaminated the air. "Babysitter with a rifle," one said. She ate anyway, jaw steady. Later in the motor pool, even the SEALs passing through smirked when they heard her name tossed around like trash. Dead weight, afraid to deploy. The names didn't matter. What mattered was the notebook in her pocket, the contour lines sketched into memory, the storm she knew was gathering. And when the radios finally began to fray, when voices bled panic across the net, she would know the moment had arrived. She didn't know yet that her silence was about to end. She didn't know yet that every page she had written was about to matter. But something inside her whispered what no one else was ready to admit. The battalion was walking into a coffin. And the only person who had seen it coming was the one they refused to hear. What happens when the world confirms your worst prediction? At first the radios hummed with routine comfort. Position checks, convoy status, reports clipped and steady, the rhythm of men who believed the day belonged to them. Dots crawled across the drone feed, little green markers pushing down a narrow dirt finger, heat shimmer turning the picture liquid. Elena stood in the command room, headset draped around her neck, eyes fixed on the monitors. The valley looked exactly the way her notebook had warned her it would. Narrow approaches, ridges like clenched fists, angles too perfect to be accidental. The first missed report felt like a skipped heartbeat. Then another. Two voices overlapping, one shouting for dismounts, another swearing about an engine that wasn't the problem. Then the sound that lives in every Marine's nightmares. The bend in a man's voice when the world ahead of him detonates. Contact, contact. Static swallowed the rest. Another net screamed about fire from the east ridge. Another tried to call in bearings and choked it into breathless gasps. On the drone feed, muzzle flashes bloomed like violent sparks. Streaks of smoke spat from draws. Convoy dots bunched together, paralyzed in the bowl. The command room froze. Chairs scraped to a halt. Cursors stopped moving. The colonel's jaw worked, but no order came. A lieutenant reached for a checklist, skimming the neat black lines, searching for a solution written on paper. But no checklist accounted for what the screen showed. 480 Marines caught in a box that was never routine, never safe. Hold position, a major said finally, voice trembling with borrowed authority. Wait, protocol's clear, we hold. Another captain repeated it louder, as if volume could turn fear into strategy. Too hot for support within 200 meters. Rules are clear. But the rules didn't change the valley. On the feed, a helmet cam flickered, dust crawling across grass, boots jerking as rounds chewed the earth around them. Ridges glowed with muzzle fire. Marines tried to crawl low enough to vanish. Elena's breath thinned. She leaned closer to the drone angle, just a sliver of rock, just enough to glimpse the crown of a machine gun pit. She counted the bursts, the arcs of traverse. She mapped the rhythm in her head like a metronome. The colonel asked for options. The major recited doctrine again. We wait for them to bound out, then we bring steel. They can't bound, a captain whispered. Then they hold, the major snapped, grateful to have a line that sounded like order. No one laughed now. No smirks, no whispers, just silence broken by the low drone of men dying through radios. Elena's hand drifted to the canvas of her rifle case. Leather rough under her palm, her anchor, her promise. The machine gun on the eastern spur walked bursts down a gully, pinning an entire squad flat against the dirt. In the draw below, an RPG team shifted for a clean angle on a Humvee belching smoke. Too hot, the major repeated, as though words could shield the pinned. Elena's voice came before she could stop it. Nobody asking for ordnance. A rifle will do. The colonel turned half an inch, not enough to mean listening, enough to mean annoyance. We're not authorizing anything inside the 200-meter bubble. It's not authorization, she said, calm, steady. It's geometry. Give me position and time, I'll cut their anchors without touching ours. A captain gave a dry laugh that cracked in the middle. You'll save a battalion with a scoped opinion, Sergeant. Stay in your lane. From the doorway, one of the lance corporals smirked. Dead weight wants a field trip. The room clung to its silence, as though waiting was safer than deciding. Elena unzipped the case. The sound was soft, almost hidden under static and keys, but a first sergeant near the door looked up. Where are you going with that rifle? Out, she said. Her voice was even, her steps heavier than her frame. The colonel repeated the rule again, clinging to its safety. The 200-meter rule stands. No one stopped her, no one followed. The battalion's obituary was already being written in their silence. Elena walked through the compound like a shadow, past Humvees coated in dust, past crates stinking of fuel, past men who had mocked her in mess halls now watching her with wide, uncertain eyes. In her vest pocket, her father's dog tag tapped softly against her chest, metal worn thin, letters almost faded. His memory walked beside her. At the compound's edge, she checked her load. M40A5 slung across her shoulder, extra magazines tight in pouches, rangefinder clipped to her belt, notebook pages folded in a sleeve tucked near her heart. She had everything she needed, not for glory, not for defiance, but for geometry. The climb was brutal. Loose shale shifted under her boots, every step fought her. Dust clung to her face, streaked her sleeves. She moved low, her body pressed into the slope as though she'd done this 1,000 times in silence. By the time she reached the crown of the ridge, her lungs burned. She pressed herself flat, setting the bipod into dirt, and let the world shrink into her scope. The valley below was chaos given shape. Marines sprawled behind burning vehicles. Muzzle flashes peppered the ridges. RPG trails split the air like white scars. Smoke and dust mixed into a haze of suffocation. She found her first target. 900 meters, eastern spur. Machine gun chewing fire in steady rhythm. Each burst pinned men flat. Each burst wrote another line in the casualty report already being drafted. She exhaled, the reticle steadied. Her finger pressed. The suppressed crack was nothing in the valley's roar, but the machine gunner collapsed. His weapon stuttered to silence. For a breath the valley paused. Marines lifted their heads confused. Radios sputtered. Who's firing? Do we have air? Negative, no CAS cleared. Elena didn't answer. She chambered the next round. An RPG team crouched 70 meters from a pin squad. The launcher angled toward a smoking Humvee. She read the smoke, measured the arc pressed. The gunner folded. The rocket clattered harmlessly into dirt. Marines shouted into the net, "Who the hell's covering us?" Still she stayed silent, crawled forward 3 meters, changed her angle. Scope swung north. Each shot wasn't subtraction, it was addition. A squad leader collapsed mid-order, his men scattering without direction. A machine gunner jerked back, leaving a tripod useless. A runner with ammo fell before he could refill a pit. Threads cut, lines broken, seams torn. The kill box began to unravel. On the radios, voices shifted, confusion sharpened. This isn't air, this is a rifle, somebody's got Overwatch. Her sleeve snagged on rock riding up. The tattoo on her forearm, scoped rifle, laurel wreath caught the light. For the first time in months she didn't hide it. The net went quiet. A new voice, rough and certain, cut in. The SEAL commander moving with the battalion. "Call sign check. Who the hell's firing cover?" Elena didn't answer, but someone else did. Someone with access to files. Phantom 7. The net froze. That name wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dismissal. It was whispered at sniper school, tied to impossible shots, to scars no one wanted to acknowledge. "Wait, Phantom 7, that's Elena Marquez." The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was recognition. The colonel in the command room went rigid. The support detail nobody wanted was now the only thing holding his battalion together. But Elena didn't hear their realization. She only heard wind, distance, rhythm, geometry. She kept pressing the trigger, one breath, one shot, one thread cut at a time. The valley, once a tomb, began a shift. Not enough to save them yet, but enough to prove silence could no longer hold her back. How long can one rifle hold back a valley of fire? The kill box was designed to suffocate them. Fire from 3 ridges, RPG teams threading the air, machine guns cutting lanes into the dirt. Doctrine said there was no way out, but Elena was dismantling doctrine one shot at a time. She pressed her cheek to the stock, her scope steady against the blur of dust. Breath in, breath out, trigger squeeze. Each round was more than a bullet. It was a knife cutting through the net that had tightened around her battalion. On the net, Marines whispered like men seeing a ghost. "This isn't air. This is a rifle. It's Phantom 7. The name carried weight, not from medals, not from speeches, but from whispers at sniper school, from stories of impossible hits. Elena had never asked for the legend, but she carried it anyway, buried under months of mockery, hidden behind a sleeve. Now her call sign was bleeding through the net, steadying voices, reshaping fear into something sharper. A sergeant on the ground shouted, "We've got Overwatch. Phantom 7's cutting the spurs." The valley seemed to hesitate, as if the enemy themselves recognized the shift. Elena didn't let herself hear it. She couldn't. Recognition was noise. She had work, geometry not glory, angles not applause. Her scope slid to the northern lip where a team shifted with a PKM. She tracked the assistant gunner carrying belts, his shoulders hunched under the weight. Her reticle froze, finger pressed, and both men folded before the weapon could speak. The silence where their fire should have been gave Marines room to breathe, to crawl, to push a little farther toward cover. The drone feed, once a blur of chaos, began showing seams, gaps, spaces where Marines could move. In the command center, the colonel stood stone-faced, watching the monitor. The major beside him whispered, "We've got air after all." The SEAL commander cut him off. "That's not air, that's a rifle, that's Phantom 7. His voice didn't hold mockery, it held reverence. Back on the ridge, Elena shifted, crawling through dust and stone to avoid the enemy's counter-snipers. She flattened herself against the slope, heartbeat steady, every inch of movement calculated. Sun pressed heat into her back. Sweat traced lines into dust on her cheek. Her scope caught a flicker, a glint on the western ridge. Enemy sniper, patient, searching for the ghost cutting through his men. She stilled, let the seconds stretch. She knew the patience of snipers, knew it was a duel of stillness, of waiting for the breath that betrayed you. Her world narrowed into the glass. There, a shoulder's shift, a barrel tilting too sharp. Her reticle kissed the movement. She exhaled, pressed. The glint vanished. For a moment she felt the echo of her father's voice. Slow trigger, let the shot surprise you. Her sleeve had ridden up again. The tattoo-scoped rifle, laurel wreath, glared in the sunlight. She didn't pull the sleeve down this time. Let them see. Let the valley know. The net buzzed with disbelief turning into awe. She's carving lanes, look at that. We're moving, we're actually moving. On the ground, Marines shifted from panic to coordination. Squad leaders barked sharper orders. Men crawled, then ran. The kill box wasn't dead. It was still chewing fire, but for the first time it was breaking. Elena's shots weren't just killing enemies. They were stitching courage back into her brothers. Still, she felt the weight of being seen. For months, invisibility had been armor. Mockery had been background noise. But now, every trigger pull made her the center of gravity. Every shot confirmed that the one they had dismissed was the one holding them together. And part of her hated it. She didn't want to be legend. She wanted the valley quiet. She wanted her men alive. Recognition was dangerous. It drew fire, it drew eyes, it drew envy. But recognition had come anyway, and there was no pulling it back. She shifted again, crawling to a new nest as tracer fire stitched the rock around her. A machine gun had found her general position. She pressed her body into dirt, heart steady, fingers calm. She dragged herself sideways, inch by inch, until the world opened at a new angle. There, an enemy squad rushing to refill a gun pit. She cut the leader. The squad scattered. Another RPG streaked smoke into the air, but she clipped the gunner mid-draw. The rocket tumbled into the rocks. The radios sharpened. "This is Bravo, we're pushing, corridors opening." For the first time in hours, hope replaced panic. The SEAL commander's voice cut across every net. "All units, Phantom 7 has us covered. Move, move." It wasn't just permission. It was command, it was faith. Elena chambered the next round. Her cheek pressed harder into the stock. Her father's dog tag knocked against her vest in rhythm with her pulse. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She let the rifle breathe. Because this wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving her men right. The men crawling, sprinting, dragging the wounded. The ones who had thought the valley was their tomb, now hearing a ghost whisper survival into their radios. Shot after shot, she carved silence into chaos. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the dust and sweat, beneath the scars and the names, she began to understand. Invisibility had always been her shield. But now, visibility was her weapon. The battalion wasn't just surviving. It was beginning to believe. What does it feel like when hope finally returns to a battlefield? For hours the valley had been nothing but smoke and fire, squads pinned, bodies pressed flat against earth, the sky an endless ceiling of gunfire. But then came the sound they thought they'd never hear: rotor blades. The first helicopter punched through the haze, its blades chopping the air into a frenzy. Dust swirled in choking spirals. The corridor Elena had carved with her rifle became a funnel, guiding the pilots into a landing zone that should have been suicide. Elena's cheek pressed into the stock. Her scope tracked not the helicopters, but the shadows moving to kill them. Muzzle flashed too close to the LZ. An enemy squad sprinting for one last shot. A figure shifting in the rocks with a tube balanced on his shoulder. Her reticle froze. She pressed. The RPG dropped into dust before the trigger could be squeezed. The helicopter slammed into the dirt. Marines surged, dragging the wounded, covering with what little ammo they had left. On the radio, a squad leader's voice cracked into disbelief. "First chalk, up, taking aboard the wounded." Elena exhaled, already swinging her scope. A muzzle flash on the ridge, a shadow where no shadow belonged. She pressed again. The ridge fell silent. Another helicopter followed, blades rattling teeth across the valley. Elena shifted positions, crawling low through shale, dragging her rifle to a new nest. Her elbows burned. Her knees bled from scraping rock. Still she moved. Her sleeve snagged again, leaving her tattoo bare. Scoped rifle, Laurel. Clear, undeniable, Phantom 7. Her call sign rippled through the net like voltage. "Phantom 7 has us covered. Hold the corridor, phantoms on the ridge." The voices steadied. Panic turned to clipped efficiency. Marines who had been gasping now barked orders with sharp conviction. The fight shifted from survival to extraction. But for Elena there was no shift. No pause, just angles, wind, distance. Her breathing was steady, but her muscles screamed. Her eyes burned from dust. Each trigger press was a war against fatigue. Still she kept cutting. An enemy command node collapsed mid-order. A machine gun nest went silent mid-burst. A runner with fresh belts stumbled, dropped, and never rose. Each round wasn't just survival. It was time. Time bought for men scrambling aboard birds. Time bought for wounded carried by trembling arms. Time bought for the living. Through her scope she saw faces, mud-streaked, wide-eyed Marines sprinting through a corridor that shouldn't have existed. Faces that didn't know her name but knew, somehow, that someone was watching them. Someone had refused to let them die unseen. The radios crackled with something foreign, something fragile: hope. Second bird inbound, corridor holding. Third chalk moving, phantoms got us. The SEAL commander's voice carried weight across every net. "All units, Phantom 7 holds the line. Move with confidence, move with speed." Confidence. That word hadn't existed an hour ago. Back in the command center, men who had mocked her sat silent, their eyes locked on screens that showed impossible survival. Officers who had dismissed her stared without speaking. The colonel stood rigid, his face carved in disbelief and something else, something closer to shame. But Elena didn't see them. She didn't hear them. Her world was her scope, her father's dog tag tapping against her chest, her breath sinking with the weight of a trigger. She shifted again, crawling to a new nest. Each movement was slower now, her body heavy with fatigue. Her palms were raw, her cheek pressed harder into the stock, bruising against the glass. She found another target, an enemy sniper patient scanning for her flicker. She read the angle, the light, the tension in his stillness. She let seconds stretch until his barrel twitched. Then she pressed. Silence. Her lips barely moved, but she whispered anyway. Steady breath, slow trigger. Her father's words. Another helicopter lifted, dust exploding into the air. Another squad checked in. Delta secure, boarding bird. The SEAL commander's voice cracked into the net. All 480 accounted for, 0 left behind. The words hit harder than any bullet. Zero left behind. Elena didn't let herself feel it, not yet. She chambered another round, scanned the ridge, another muzzle flash, another threat. She pressed, cleared. Only when the last rotor blurred into the sky did she allow herself to ease her cheek from the stock. Her hands trembled now that the work was done. Her face was blank, but her body shook under the weight of what she'd carried. The climb down was slower. Rocks shifted under her boots. Her rifle dragged heavier than steel should. The dog tag tapped against her chest, steady as a heartbeat, each step an echo of her father's memory. By the time she reached the compound, helicopters were spilling Marines onto the dirt, battered, bloodied, alive. Medics rushed forward, stretchers unfolded. Shouts filled the air. But beneath it all was something heavier: silence. Not the silence of mockery, not the silence of dismissal, the silence of respect. Marines lined the path into the compound, helmets tucked under arms, eyes fixed on her. Men who had scraped chairs away from her table now stood at attention, squared shoulders, unmoving. She walked through them, rifle slung across her chest, boots leaving prints in dust. She didn't look for their eyes, didn't need their recognition. The silence spoke louder than words. At the far end of the line, the colonel waited. His posture was regulation perfect, his jaw tight. When she stopped before him, the compound seemed to hold its breath. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said, voice sharp, brittle. "Yes, sir," she answered. The pause stretched long enough to snap. Every man around them held still, waiting. Then the colonel's voice broke, softer, older. "You saved a battalion." For the first time his eyes met hers. Not her file, not her name tape, her. And behind him the SEAL commander stepped forward. Dust streaked his uniform. Blood dried at his temple. His voice carried the weight of survival. "Phantom 7, he said, snapping a salute. "The valley owes you." The silence fractured into sound, an ovation that wasn't wild but reverent. Boots stomped. Hands clapped. Voices murmured not mockery but respect. Elena didn't smile, didn't gloat. She lowered her eyes, whispered words no one expected. "I was just doing my duty." But everyone, their new duty had never looked like this. What happens after the gunfire stops? The valley was behind her, but the echoes followed. Rotor blades still haunted the air, their thunder fading into the distance. Radios clicked with final reports, squads checking in, medics accounting for the wounded, officers logging survival where casualty reports had already been half-written. Elena walked through it all like a shadow. Boots heavy with dust, rifle slung low, her father's dog tag tapping softly against her chest. Every step was deliberate, but each one felt heavier than the last. Marines stood in rows as she passed. Some lowered their helmets, others bowed their heads. Not a word left their mouths. The silence was its own ceremony. When she reached the armory, she pushed through the door and let the noise of the outside world seal shut. Inside, the air was cooler, still coated with the metallic tang of oil and steel. Weapons lined the racks in neat order. Tables bore the scars of cleaning rods, solvents, and years of restless hands. She set the M40A5 on the bench with care, not reverence. It wasn't a relic, it was a tool. She unstrapped her sling, unlatched her vest, and sat slowly, as though the act of sitting required permission from her body. Her hands shook, not from fear, from everything she had denied herself in those hours on the ridge: fatigue, hunger, the simple cost of being human. She picked up her notebook, pages stiff with dust, corners bent from sweat. She flipped to a clean sheet and began writing. Wind quartering left to right. Distance 870, holdover 2.1, impact confirmed. Each line steady, precise, as though her trembling fingers belonged to someone else. Numbers mattered, details mattered, recognition was noise. She stripped the rifle piece by piece, laying them out in order. Bolt face checked, barrel cleaned, scope wiped of grit. Each action grounded her, pulled her away from the weight pressing against her chest. But even here, even in solitude, the silence outside pressed through the walls. She could feel their eyes, their changed perception. She had been the one they laughed at in chow halls, the one dismissed in briefing rooms, and now she was something else. Phantom 7. The call sign clung to her like dust, reshaping her in ways she hadn't asked for. She had wanted patience, discipline, accuracy. Instead, she had become the name they whispered, the legend they reached for when hope was gone. And legends are heavier than rifles. Her mind flicked back to her father, the evenings in South Texas. Soda cans lined on fence posts, the battered hunting rifle warm in her hands. His voice steady, quiet, steady breath, slow trigger. Let the shot surprise you. He had taught her discipline, not glory, accuracy, not applause. And yet here she sat, her accuracy twisted into legend. The armory door creaked. A shadow filled the frame. It was the SEAL commander, his uniform streaked with dirt and smoke, his eyes bloodshot from hours of combat. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate quiet. For a moment he didn't speak. He just watched her work, rifle stripped, notebook open, her hands moving in ritual. "You carried us today," he said finally, voice low, even. Elena didn't look up. She cleaned the chamber with a cloth, precise circles. "I did my duty, sir." He studied her, silent, stretching. Then he nodded once, sharp and certain. "That's exactly what frightens men like them." She finally lifted her eyes. "Men like who?" "The ones who laughed, the ones who told you to stay in your lane. They live inside rules, inside protocol. You live inside accuracy." His words hung heavy. Accuracy doesn't bend, doesn't wait for permission, and today accuracy kept 480 alive. Elena's jaw tightened. She looked back to the rifle, sliding the bolt in place. They'll forget. In a week, in a month, they'll go back to their jokes. The commander leaned closer, voice sharper now. "No, they won't. Some things brand themselves too deep. They'll tell this story long after you're gone. 'We should have died in that valley,' they'll say." But Phantom 7 was watching. Elena closed the notebook, its pages filled with the geometry of survival. She tucked it into her vest pocket near her heart. "That's not why I was there." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." He stepped back, hand brushing the frame of the door, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with the same gravity he had shown in the dust of the compound, he saluted. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the rifle, the notebook, and the silence. She exhaled long and slow, her hands stilled, her body sagged against the bench. For the first time since the first shot cracked across the valley, she allowed herself to feel. Not triumph, not vindication. Something deeper, heavier, the realization that she had crossed a line she could never return from. Once invisible, now unforgettable. And part of her wished she could go back. Because being unseen had been lonely, but being seen was a burden she wasn't sure she wanted. The notebook pressed against her chest. The dog tag tapped softly against her vest. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, steady like a prayer, patience, accuracy, discipline. Outside, the Marines were already telling the story, already reshaping her into something larger than life. Inside, Elena was just a sniper, just a daughter who remembered her father's voice on quiet evenings, just a Marine who had done what accuracy demanded. But she knew the truth. Accuracy had saved them. And accuracy had changed everything. How fast does a story travel on the breath of survivors? By morning, the valley had already become legend. Marines limped through the compound with dust still caked into their wounds, voices hoarse from shouting over fire. Medics worked tirelessly, patching torn flesh, logging casualties that should have been far worse. And yet, the number hung over everything like a miracle. 0 left behind. Men who had once dismissed Elena now spoke her name in hushed tones, as if afraid to break whatever fragile power it carried. They didn't look at her directly when she passed. They stole glances, whispers trailing in her wake. Phantom 7. She carved it open herself. Saw the valley for what it was. For the first time, their voices didn't hold mockery. They held reverence, but reverence felt just as heavy. Elena walked through the compound quietly, her rifle cleaned, her notebook tucked against her chest. She moved the way she always had, low, deliberate, invisible. But invisibility no longer worked. Even in silence, eyes followed her. In the chow hall, the scraping of chairs was gone. No one moved when she sat down. Instead, men straightened unconsciously as though her presence demanded posture. She ate slowly, spoon steady against the bowl, refusing to acknowledge the weight pressing around her. Respect, she realized, could feel like a cage. Later that day, she was summoned to the colonel's office. The room was sterile, maps pinned to walls, reports stacked in neat towers. The colonel stood by the window, arms clasped behind his back, his reflection sharp in the glass. He didn't turn when she entered. "Sergeant Marquez," he said, voice controlled, brittle. "Sir," she answered, standing at attention. Silence stretched. The ticking of the wall clock grew loud enough to fill the room. Finally, he turned, his eyes harder than she'd ever seen them. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said. The same words as before, but sharper now, meant to test, to measure. "Yes, sir." "You undermined protocol. You broke chain of command. You acted without authorization." Each word fell like stone. Elena's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, sir." The colonel stepped closer, his face tightening with something darker, guilt, anger, confusion. "Do you understand what that means? If one thing had gone wrong, if your bullet had landed even an inch off, 480 men could have died under your hand, and it would have been on me." Elena met his gaze, unflinching. "Sir, if I hadn't taken those shots, 480 men would already be dead." The colonel stopped. His breath caught. He looked at her not with dismissal, not even with authority, but with something that felt like surrender. He dropped into the chair behind his desk, head bowing into his hands for a moment before he straightened. "Do you know what terrifies me, Sergeant?" His voice had softened. "That you were right, that you saw what I refused to see, and that the only reason this battalion stands today is because one Marine refused to obey me." Elena didn't move, didn't speak. The silence answered for her. The colonel exhaled, long and slow, then leaned back. "You've earned more than I can give, but you've also broken something I can't repair. Discipline relies on obedience. If I praise you, I encourage disobedience. If I punish you, I dishonor survival." His eyes locked on hers. "So tell me, Sergeant, what would you have me do?" Elena held his gaze, steady, unflinching. "Sir, that's not my decision. My duty is accuracy. Yours is judgment." The colonel studied her, the silence thick between them. Then he nodded once, sharp, decisive. "Dismissed." She saluted, turned, and left the office. Outside, the compound hummed with new energy. Men sharpened their drills. Voices carried differently in the air, lighter, steadier. They had survived the impossible, and survival remade them. But Elena felt the weight deepen. The whispers followed her everywhere now. They weren't cruel anymore, but they weren't free either. She was no longer the invisible sniper cleaning her rifle alone in the yard. She was Phantom 7, a myth, a ghost who had rewritten fate with steel and patience. And she hated it. That night she returned to her bunk. She spread her notebook across her lap under the glow of her red-lensed flashlight. Maps filled the pages, wind charts, ballistic tables, her private doctrine. She wrote in silence, steady hand recording data no one else would ever read. The act calmed her. Numbers didn't care about recognition. Geometry didn't ask for applause. But her pen hesitated. For the first time, she wondered if she could ever go back to being unseen. She thought of her father, of evenings on the farm, cans on fence posts, of his quiet pride. He had taught her patience, accuracy, silence, but he had also taught her that discipline meant responsibility, not just to herself, but to those who could not see what she saw. Maybe this was the cost of carrying his lessons into war. The whispers outside the barracks grew louder, men repeating her call sign, retelling the valley in fragments. Each retelling made her less human, more myth. And Elena realized the cruelest paradox of all. When she was mocked, she had been invisible but free. Now, respected, she was visible but trapped. She closed her notebook, slid it under her pillow, and lay back on the bunk. The ceiling stared down at her with indifference. Her father's dog tag tapped against her chest with every breath, steady as a metronome. Patience, she whispered to herself. Discipline, accuracy. But for the first time, the words didn't sound like enough. What happens when survival becomes a story too big for the truth? Nights in Helmand were rarely quiet. Generators hummed. Radios ticked with static. Somewhere, boots always struck concrete in restless rhythm. But to Elena, the silence inside her bunk was louder than anything outside. Sleep didn't come. Each time she closed her eyes, the valley returned. The stutter of machine guns, the blur of muzzle flashes, the desperate voices over the net, and always the sight through her scope, the face of a man just before her trigger ended him. She told herself what her father had told her: accuracy is duty, not choice. But duty didn't erase faces, it etched them. She turned in her bunk, dog tag tapping softly against her chest. Her notebook lay beneath her pillow, its pages filled with lines of numbers, geometry of survival. She wanted the comfort of writing, but her hand wouldn't move. For the first time, the numbers didn't silence the ghosts. Outside, voices drifted through the thin walls of the barracks. Marines telling the valley story again, retelling it like scripture. Pinned for hours, couldn't move an inch. Thought we were dead for sure. Then Phantom 7 started cutting the ridges. Each telling made her less a person, more a shadow. Phantom 7, not Sergeant Marquez. A myth to be worshipped, not a Marine to be understood. And the strangest part, they weren't mocking anymore. The same men who had laughed in chow halls now lowered their voices in awe when she passed. The same officers who had dismissed her in briefings now paused, measuring her with new, uncertain eyes. Respect had replaced ridicule, but it felt heavier, not lighter. In the training yard, Marines adjusted their posture when she walked by. On the range, men who had once smirked now watched her shoot with quiet reverence. They whispered about her notebook, about her tattoo, about shots no one else could have made. One lance corporal, the same who had called her dead weight, approached her after a drill. His face was pale, voice unsure. "Ma'am, could you show me the way you read wind?" She looked at him for a long moment. He had mocked her for months. Now he wanted to learn. "Elbows low," she said quietly. "Watch the grass before the dust. The grass moves first." He nodded as if she'd handed him a secret. Maybe she had. But each request, each whisper, each sideways glance pressed against her chest. They weren't seeing her. They were seeing the ghost of Phantom 7, and ghosts don't get to rest. The colonel changed, too. His briefings were sharper now, more cautious. Maps studied twice. Terrain walked 3 times before orders were given. He asked for opinions more often, but not hers. Never hers. It was as if acknowledging her would break him completely. But Elena didn't need his validation. She saw his shame in the way his jaw tightened when her name passed through the compound. She saw it in the way he stood a little straighter when she entered a room, as though her presence demanded atonement. And yet higher command had already taken notice. Reports traveled upward, rewritten with careful words. Unconventional sniper support. Extraordinary accuracy under fire. Phrases that sanitized survival into paperwork, but the whispers spread faster than ink. Other units asked questions. Who was Phantom 7? Where had she come from? Was she real or just another battlefield myth? Elena heard it on the radio nets late at night. Marines trading rumors across frequencies, ghost sniper in Helmand. Phantom 7 saved a whole battalion. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Discipline doesn't seek applause, but applause had found her anyway. And with it came the weight of expectation. Every patrol that left the wire now carried a subtle, unspoken confidence. Phantoms watching, someone would murmur. We're not alone. But Elena couldn't be everywhere, couldn't shoulder every ridge, every kill box, every trap. And yet, the myth they'd built around her didn't care. It demanded her presence even when she wasn't there. That was the cruelest part. The same men who had once treated her as nothing now needed her to be everything. At night, she sat cross-legged in the armory, rifle across her lap, notebook open. The smell of solvent and steel wrapped around her like ritual. She logged wind patterns, range calculations, firing angles. She told herself the numbers still mattered. But another part of her, the part that remembered soda cans on fence posts and her father's quiet pride, knew the numbers were no longer hers alone. They belonged to the story now, to Phantom 7, to something bigger, heavier, and less human. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she found herself alone on the ridge above the compound. She lay prone, scope steady, watching the valley stretch into shadow. No targets, no mission, just the silence of dust and distance. Her hand found the dog tag on her chest. She pressed it between her fingers, edges worn smooth, letters fading. "Did you know this would happen?" she whispered into the wind. "Did you know what discipline really costs?" The wind carried no answer, only the echo of rotor blades fading into memory. Back in the compound, the whispers continued. Phantom 7, the ghost on the ridge, the sniper who rewrote fate. And Elena realized something bitter, something sharp. She had saved the battalion. She had carved open the valley. She had turned silence into survival. But in doing so, she had lost the one thing she had guarded most fiercely. Her invisibility. Now, no matter how still she became, no matter how quiet her breath, she would never be unseen again. How do stories outlive the people who lived them? In the weeks that followed, the valley became more than a battlefield. It became a tale. Marines carried it out of Helmand like contraband, folded into their voices, whispered across radio nets, repeated at outposts where dust and fear pressed just as heavy. We should have died in that valley. Zero left behind, because Phantom 7 was watching. The name traveled faster than the reports. By the time command rewrote the after-action summary into sterile phrases, unexpected resistance, successfully mitigated, the truth was already alive in mess halls and smoke pits. Phantom 7 wasn't a number on a page. She was a ghost in the ridges, a sniper who refused to let silence write an obituary for 480 Marines. Elena never spoke when she heard the retellings. She listened in silence, hands folded over her notebook, eyes steady. Some Marines swore they'd seen her on the ridge, dust covering her face, tattoo catching the sun. Others claimed she had been everywhere at once, cutting targets like a phantom's hand. The details twisted with each telling, stretched wider, made sharper. Legends don't belong to the ones who live them. Legends belong to the ones who need them. And Elena understood that now. In the compound, respect had replaced every smirk. The men who had once shifted chairs away from her table now left space open at her side. They still didn't know what to say. Respect had weight, but no words. The colonel changed, too. He didn't meet her eyes often, but when he did, there was no dismissal left in them. Only the unspoken truth of a man who had been wrong and who would live with that wrongness for the rest of his career. The SEAL commander remained the only one who treated her as human, not myth. He saluted when it mattered, but when they crossed paths in quiet moments, he simply nodded, Marine to Marine, nothing more. That Elena valued most of all. But none of it gave her back what she had lost. She still woke in the night, her body stiff, her chest tight. The valley replayed behind her eyelids not as victory but as repetition. Each face she had ended, each breath she had taken, each shot that had rewritten geometry. Her notebook couldn't silence them anymore. She walked the ridges alone sometimes, when the sun bled low across the horizon and the compound buzzed behind her. She lay prone in the dust, her rifle across her chest, scope aimed at nothing but the endless folds of land. It wasn't the battlefield she saw in those moments. It was South Texas, flat farmland stretching forever, sodakins balanced on fence posts, her father's rough hand steadying her shoulders, his voice in her ear, steady breath, slow trigger, let the shot surprise you. He had never spoken of glory, never spoken of applause, only patience, only discipline. And in those quiet moments, Elena realized she hadn't betrayed his lessons. She had fulfilled them, even when it meant giving up the invisibility she had clung to. Because true patience doesn't wait for recognition, it waits for necessity. True accuracy doesn't ask for permission, it answers the geometry of survival. And true discipline doesn't roar, it doesn't beg, it doesn't demand. It acts quietly, steadily, until the world has no choice but to notice. The battalion would retell the valley forever. Higher command would sanitize it, and Marines in future wars would whisper her call sign like a talisman. Phantom 7, the sniper who turned a coffin into a corridor. But Elena didn't need the whispers. She didn't need the legend. All she needed was the rifle across her chest, the notebook against her heart, and the weight of her father's dog tag tapping with each breath. She sat one evening at the far edge of the training yard, cross-legged on a tarp, rifle stretched across her lap, just as she had before the valley, just as she always would. Only this time when Marines passed, they didn't smirk. They didn't whisper insults. They nodded, subtle and quiet, as though disturbing her ritual would be sacrilege. Elena didn't return the nods. She didn't need to. She simply ran the cloth through the barrel, scribbled a note in the margins, and breath steady as the rifle became part of her again. The world outside could carry Phantom 7, could carry the myth. She would carry something else, the discipline of silence, the duty of accuracy, the patience to act only when the geometry demanded it. Her father had been right all along. True courage isn't loud, it isn't obvious. It doesn't wait for permission or applause. It hides in patience, it lives in silence. And when the world finally needs it, it doesn't speak. It simply acts.